We're recording.
Nice. Hello, innovative teachers. In today's episode, we talk all about grading students. How do we do this correctly, and how do we make sure students are graded formatively and summatively? We have both had times where students are left wondering how they will be graded and what that will look like for them. This can be nerve-wracking for the kids or the kid that needs that little extra motivation to make sure they're on task. Also, if you're already loving our podcast, make sure to subscribe, rate, and review. This helps spread the word to other innovative teachers who would love to connect to our community. Tune in for a great episode full of tons of useful information. We can't wait to learn and grow with you. All right, now we can get started. We got through that little intro. So if you're watching this, we kind of have decided that we would be able to post this video a couple different places, just in case maybe you're not able to watch or not watch, listen to the podcast, but rather watch it. So something a little bit different. You can actually see it. So I feel like now, like I have my light ring on, like normally I don't.
I
I feel like
probably should.
I feel like I'm trying a little bit harder, which I don't know why. Yeah,
Uh,
you don't, now you have to get yours out now that I said something.
I have it. Oh, that's I have it ready to go.
You have to. So if you're listening, you know, like, hey, now you got to go watch if you want to see us talking too. So
Yes.
today we're talking. Today we're talking all about like grading students, and this is always, I feel like, a hot topic and something that's asked a lot at conferences or among STEM teachers, or just that specialist teacher that teaches something just a little bit different than everyone else, and how that looks. And I think in every room it's going to look different, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we talked about it beforehand. Your room looks different than my room, and how both those ways can be effective. So
Mm-hmm.
even though you might use some of these models, and we hope you do, we hope this helps, take in mind every room's different, and what's going to work for each kid is going to be tremendously different.
Yeah, and definitely also like your school or district's grading practices, you might have different expectations of how deep you have to assess or just all those different factors. So we have our tips and what we've tried and what seems to work well for us.
Yeah, so like my first key point that I put over here on our little show notes is I'm always worried about the thought process over correctness. So like right now I'm even working on like releasing my fall STEM fun activities. There's like a set of 3 of them, and everything I release, if you buy anything, I always don't really have like a grading, like a graded paper, so to speak. And everyone always told me when I did TPT I kind of had to have that. And in my videos, I always explain like, well, I'm not necessarily looking for correct answers here. I'm not looking for like a certain answer. I'm looking for thought process. Can you analyze what you answered and tell me, well, why do you think that? Because I think science is so much more of a way of thinking and reasoning than it is
Yes.
about memorizing definitions.
I,
I'm less impressed if a kid can tell me, and like if I ask a question and he just says, "Oh, this is the definition." I'm
mm-hmm.
not really impressed by that, but I'm impressed if he can use that word in a sentence and say, "Oh, that this makes sense," or "Mine didn't work because of this," and that's what I'm looking for. And I think that's what we all need to look for in science, because like even I know in Indiana for our state standardized testing, you get more points for explaining than you
Yes.
do the correct answer.
Yep.
So it's
That's
like,
like
why
us.
not? Yeah, so why not teach that way is my thing. And I mean, I feel like most you know states are like that I know of, that I can think of off the top of my head. I'm kind of trying to think on my feet here, but
Mm-hmm.
we're seeing that, so why not reflect that in our practices?
Yeah. And
And
that
that's
helps them with other subjects too. Like if they can be detailed and explain their thinking, that's such a high level of thinking to be able to think about your thinking. So even if they're doing this in STEM, it can help them in reading. If they're writing a reading response, they have that high level thinking strategies and they can add more details to their written response or their story. They have more details in their story. Their math, like they can explain step by step. So this is helping them across all subject areas, not just isolated in STEM, which I really like that.
Yeah, and when we talk about all the time how you can have STEM practices in your other subjects, so this is just another way, I feel like, when we're looking at all those things, not that state standardized testing is our goal, like, hey, let's teach the test, but I mean, those practices are being, modeled because that's what they want. They want, thought process. How do you think? So, and I even put on here because I thought this was really cool. This actually happened today. I'm doing my race car unit, which I'm working on releasing soon too, which the kids love. And this one kid was like, my car wasn't very fast
Oh,
because he called it the kinesthetic energy.
The
He's like, the energy,
Cosmetic?
yeah. He goes, the kinetic energy moving down was not very strong. And I'm like, you mean kinetic energy? And he goes, yeah, that's the one where you're moving, right? And I'm like, yeah, like, you know what it means, you just don't know the word. So I'm like, he has the idea down. And I think that's so important. And when he said that, I was like, I'm gonna have to share that with people, because that's, to me, that's what's all about. He understood what went well, what didn't go well in his testing. He was able to say, well, this didn't go well. He just didn't know what the correct word was, which is fine, because I mean, kids mispronounce words all the time. So the fact that he like kind of even said, oh yeah, that isn't the right word, but like he even said, he goes, I understand it. And I'm like, exactly. And that's all I care about. And I'm the same way with giving kids like definitions. So like a lot of times when I have them do worksheets, I'm like, what is potential energy? If they go and they just copy and paste it right from Google, I'm like, that's great and copy and paste, because that's, I think, important. But I want to know what you think it means. And I was like, you're not going to be able to remember that. Like, what do you think that word means? So having those kids kind of think for themselves and come up with their own definition, their own reasoning, I think that's important. And that's like one of my key practices, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that I like try to do, and um, this kind of works too for a set of people, would be like the check-ins.
I love how you do this. You're really good at this.
The check-ins, you think?
Yes.
See, like that's my, like I did it, and it's kind of, this sounds bad, but it's like one of those things, like I did it originally because I was like, my principal is going to be coming in. There's some other people coming in this week. I'm like, I'm going to try this and I'm going to see if it works. And I'm like, it might be really bad and they might hate it. And they were like, oh, that was really cool. And like the kids, as soon as I introduce it, now it's like their thing. Like even this year, they
Aw.
kind of pushed me to like other rooms. We've been outside, but they're like, we need to have a check-in, like, so I can talk to
We need
you.
to check in.
Yeah, like they're demanding it to me, and I'm like, yeah, we can do that. That's fine. So, what check-in kind of inquires is like a different form of assessment. So rather than seeing kids do things on worksheet or talk about, things maybe to someone else, it's a little bit more informal. So they're, talking to me. I'm going through a rubric, just asking them questions. Like, how'd you feel about your design? What do you understand about this, this, and this? So it's kind of like almost like I'm saying, through these different rubrics I have back there, do you understand these concepts? Do you understand this? And a lot of times it's just them talking to me, and I'm just making little notes saying, oh, they really understand this, or they don't understand this. And that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get a bad grade.
Mhm.
That just means, hey, maybe they don't understand this, and I'm going to explain it better tomorrow. And if they understand it, then I can put them in this 5 range, and I know they're ready to move on. So I think that's grading a lot of times too, is just a good gauge
Mhm.
for
Do
where
you ever
students.
Sorry.
No,
Do
go
you
ahead.
ever see like trends, like when you're talking to the kids, do you ever see like, oh, like this group of kids are all doing it this way. I need to change it up for them. Do you ever see like common themes when you talk to them?
Yeah, so like even like last week, one thing that's like tough about my school year, like they usually like travel to rooms for different levels of math, reading, and stuff. So instead they can't travel, so they have them like in low, medium, and high groups.
Mhm.
And usually, like I have, my lower students don't usually struggle. Like it's usually like almost the same thing. Sometimes they do better, but there's just this one grade where they really struggled and they just haven't gotten it. So, and they all tried to do like the same thing, and it, for like the roller coasters last week, and it was so bad. And I'm like, oh my goodness, and it was so stressful. And then the next week, I was like, maybe I just need to like make this easier if I change this, this, and this. And then that group was like, you're like overthinking this, like this. So
Oh,
I mean, like I do see where like there's certain kids that like will grasp a concept, and maybe their model looks really great, and then this one over here, theirs might not look as good, and it is a little trendy, and I think that's the hard part about STEM, because I know like when I was in school, if we were doing a project, I might look over at my buddies and be like, oh, what did he do? Maybe I'll do
yeah.
something close to him, So I mean, that's not always bad. I tell the kids either, because I'm like, you can learn something from your friends.
Yes. And they get, well, sometimes of them get sad. They're like, they're copying me. I'm like,
Yeah,
there's no such thing. Like, I don't
that's
see,
what I always say.
I don't see a scanner in here. Like, we're not making copies in here. I don't know what you're talking about.
That's, I always tell them that too, because I'm like, when you go to Walmart, you see 10 things of the same product, but they're all just a little bit different.
Yep.
I said his is just a little bit different than yours, and then we usually test, and they end up being a little bit different. But yeah, that's one thing I always see too, is with that, and with check-ins, that's a little bit tougher. And really, I think check-ins is my favorite way of grading, because I kind of get a check on them and how they feel about the project too, and it lets me know, well, maybe I need to change this about the product, or the project, I mean, and what I can do. So that's kind of ultimately how I look at grading. I know, you might do a little bit different, but really I tell the kids you're always going to get a rubric grade, and that's kind of like that check-in grade. And then those step-by-step worksheets where we're defining the problem, we're brainstorming, we're collecting data from testing, all those sheets you'll get a grade on. But I tell them, I'm like, I'm not looking for a certain answer. So don't come fishing just for like, hey, do I need to put this? Like,
Mhm.
not gonna tell you because I want you to put what you think, and they hate that because they're not used to it, like you said.
Yes.
So it's a different way of thinking, and I think the grading should reflect that as well. So
Mhm. I have a question about like your check-ins and all that. What do you do standards-based grading? Are you required to do that in STEM? Like, do you have specific standards you have to follow, or are you using like the next generation science, or do you use like their literacy standards or math? Like, what do you have to use?
that's a good question. So I actually use like the Indiana, they have standards, so like our state standards. I use those, and I'll link them to all my units. But like the Indiana standards are usually like define a problem using criteria constraints. So a lot of times too, when my kids are like checking in with me and stuff on the board, I talk about that standard because our state likes when you talk about that standard. So I even have it like displayed in my room. That's like one of the check boxes that they want us to have. So
Okay.
I kind of like telling the kids like, hey, this is what the state wants you to
Yeah,
know. And they're
for
like, oh,
sure.
we're doing that. Yeah. And so I'll do that. And then I do like science standards tied in with that, and the math, technology. And it's a lot in STEM to have that many standards. And that might be like a separate episode. We talk about how to wrap your mind around that. Cause that's what people always say. They're like, how can you teach everything? And I'm like, well,
Well,
they overlap, somehow here, but you just kind of have to piece it together. But that's the
well, and there's
whole
a
mostly.
difference between teaching it or are you assessing it? So, like, what are
Yes.
you? Because you might be have all these different standards, but there might just be one you're actually assessing.
And I think that's a great way to word it too, because we look at those things such, I mean, so much alike. Like, oh, you're not really teaching this standard because I'm not assessing it. Well, that's not necessarily true. They're showing me they know it just in a different way than you're used to seeing in a classroom. So
Mhm.
that's for sure. So you do like the checklist thing, which I think is great. Do you want to touch on that a little bit and some other things?
So I know not everybody is a fan of the writing Lucy Calkins. I am a fan. I liked it when I was a classroom teacher. It made me a better writing teacher and in a lot of ways a better teacher. But anyway, she has these checklists that students use in their writing. So when they're going through a project, they're writing. They go through the checklist and they have a not yet, starting to, got it. So I took that concept. So when I'm doing engineering design challenges, I have a checklist just like that. So it's each part of the engineering design process. So we have the question at the top. They don't need to check that really. But then if the planning stage, did you make a plan? Not yet, starting to, got it. So we'll go through that checklist like every other day. I mean, every day is great, but obviously with time, that's kind of hard. But every other day, we'll kind of pause and go through that checklist to see where we're at in the process. And it just makes that engineering design process more concrete, but also keep kids accountable that they are staying on pace and getting their work done, because we obviously don't have forever time to get everything done. It just helps that keep that pace up. And some kids just need a visual, and I like checking things off a box. So they really
I'm the
like,
same way.
yeah. So it's like,
Mhm.
check, I got it. And that's a good skill to learn, like how to use a checklist. That is a life skill.
Do
So
you do it like individually, like go through each one with them, or do you do it as like a class?
I do it more as a class. So I
Okay.
often like to assign it through Seesaw or Google Classroom because they
Ooh,
can
I like
change
that.
it. Pencil's fine. I mean, I can obviously print it if I need to, but we'll talk about it as a class more so I can help read wherever they're at. Sometimes we'll even just do a couple lines of the checklist. Like we won't even do the whole thing. I'm like, okay, so these three at the bottom, we're not going to talk about yet. We haven't done that part. So we're just going to do these first two, see where you're at. So it's just a good way to help them, like I said, stay on track, stay accountable, do their work. I mean, almost all of them do their work, but you have those little stragglers who they need a
I was
little
gonna say they need a little
push.
push.
So that's good. I do rubrics too. Again, it just depends on what it is. It might be a rubric about the process, or it might be a rubric about the actual product. So one rubric I'm using right now, just one I drew up on an anchor chart, is the process of planning. You might see kids scribble a little plan. They're like, oh, I planned. I'm like, you did? Like, oh, okay, well, how can we make this better? And I just kept repeating myself. So I'm like, okay, how can I make a rubric? So I have a 4-star rubric just on my board, and it's a 1-star plan is a drawing, a 2-star plan is a drawing and labels, 3-star plan drawing labels, but then you have the front and the back view. So if you look at
Ooh,
prototypes, yeah. So I'm
I
like,
like that.
when they submit for prototypes, inventions, they have multiple views. And so, sure, your plan, you see the front view, but I showed them like a little toy. I'm like, okay, look at this toy. Does he have just one side? They're like, no. I'm like, so we need to know on the bottom he has wheels. If I didn't draw that, nobody would know. So that's a 3-star plan. And then a 4-star plan has all of that. So multiple views, but you also have to describe what each part is. That one I don't see as often, to be honest, but just with time. But again, that kind of goes with like what prototypes are. What prototypes, they label each part and they explain what each part does. So just really helping them build up their plan. And they're like, I'm done. I'm like, okay, well, you have a 1-star plan. How can we make this at least a 2-star or a 3-star? And they're like, oh, and I have drawings, like I have examples. So that really helps too. If you have mentor examples or something they can refer to visually, that's really helpful, I feel like, with a rubric, so they can compare. It doesn't have to be the same product. Like this one's just like a little drawing of a little robot, and I'm doing building shelters right now. Like it's not that they get the
Mhm.
point.
I just think it's such a good idea because kids, that's like the stage they want to hurry through because they know the next stage is building.
Yep,
So
they do.
this is something I struggle with, and I'm always like, and apparently, like I need to do it this way because I'm like I'm learning so much right here. I feel like right now it's something I'm going to change because like I'll be like, just go try again, and maybe they just don't understand. Like, hey, like when maybe I do need to show them something and be like, hey, this has multiple sides. Like you
Yeah.
need to think about this that way rather than me being like, oh, you need to try it again, more detail.
And they're like, what?
Yeah, and
I think they like add more color. They're like,
yeah, and I'm like,
no,
no.
that doesn't not really. Yeah. So I mean, I just started this at the end of last year, and it helps. Like, oh, and so you get a couple kids like, well, I just want a 1-star plan. I'm like,
Yeah,
well, we'll see how it goes when you build.
yeah. 1-star product, 1-star. Yeah,
one
that's how it
star
works.
product. So I'll do that. So that's like a process rubric, and then a product rubric is more like what you were talking about, like what is the end goal in mind? So like I'm thinking about a stop motion project that I did. Like, do you have 30 frames or more in your video? Because if they didn't, it goes too fast. Did you tell about the different weather patterns? So just more of like what's the end product supposed to look like?
Mhm.
So there is a difference and a purpose for both. I don't think you have to do all of that at once. Like you don't have to do all of these at once. These are
Yes,
just
that'd be a lot.
a lot. That's a lot of assessing, but just even pick one and play around with it. Um, Also, like at the end of a project, I'm not great at closure of projects. I'm really good at keeping things organized. We do all the steps and then like, okay, we're done, take it home. Like, good job. Like, I'm not great at reflecting. I
Hmm.
know I have it in place here and there. I might be good, but that's just something I've always struggled with as a teacher. Like even in the classroom, I had a hard time with that. But having like sentence frames for self-reflection, either it's verbal or they write it down. Seesaw is again great for this, or Flipgrid. But having them reflect like what went well, what is something they could work on, what would they want to change for next time, and those are great just sentence frames for them to reflect and have them think about what they did. It's not all teacher driven.
Right. And I love the fact that you said the self-reflection because I'm the same way. And I think for me, it's such like a time constraint thing. Like I'm like, I already don't have enough time for this, this, and this. Why would I make time for, self-reflection? But it's so important. And like the kids even will be like, hey, we didn't do the self-reflection, Google form. And I'm like, yeah, I know. Like we didn't have time. Yeah, yeah, we didn't. So, I mean, it is hard to make time for it. And I think if you're creative about it, and like you said, maybe one time you really concentrate on self-reflection and, product redesign and stuff. And maybe for the next project, you focus more on, the design component, like you said. So I think that was a really big key because you can't do all this at once. You're just not going to have enough time. I think you concentrate on certain things of that engineering design process or your standards and say, this unit, this unit's going to be really good for this, or this unit's going to be really good for this.
Yes.
And I think that's a huge key.
Yes. And not every subject works well for all components of all of
Mhm.
this. So it does
Exactly.
take playing around with. I mean, you'll fail and some things you will like, some things
Mhm.
you won't like. And it's just trial and error until you find a rhythm of what works really well.
Exactly.
Well, we love chatting with you guys, and we learn a lot when we do these podcasts. So I hope you learn a lot too. And to continue this journey, we would love to have you follow us on Instagram to just stay up to date with us and what's going on with our classrooms and in STEM. And if you are loving it even more, you need more content, come check us out on our Patreon for even exclusive content that is not released to everybody. So you want to get in on that. And then we also would really love to hear from you. I know you guys DM us with messages, but we also have a kind of like a voicemail system on our Anchor. So if you want to check out our Anchor page for our podcast, you can leave a specific question and you might actually be featured on a future episode and give us some ideas. Thank you so much for listening today, innovative teachers, and we will see you in the next episode.